In the 1950s, Pleasant Grove, Tex, now southeast Dallas, where I grew up, was a white working-class town where Catholics did not exist. For me, the religious others were Southern Baptists, whose distinctiveness was summed up in their refusal to dance. Our world was a Protestant world, and I was a Protestant, because what else would I be? For years, this sentiment sufficed. Then I began to learn about Catholicism. I have been thinking about Christianity for my whole life. I've spent my career as a Protestant theologian at the University of Notre Dame and Duke Divinity School. I have written many books on theology and ethics. But I still don't know how to think about the 500th anniversary of the Protestant Reformation this coming week. Divorces some Christian traditions still call Luther's revolt the Great Schism are not to be celebrated, they leave a scar. The problem is that I, like many Protestants, don't see the gulf between us and our Catholic brothers and sisters as particularly pronounced. The separation I once saw as default now makes less sense to me. Why am I not a Catholic? My first inkling of this intellectual problem began as a philosophy major actually, the philosophy major at Southwestern University in Georgetown, Tex, where I was lucky enough to have a teacher to take me through Frederick Copleston's multi-volume history of philosophy. Copleston was a Jesuit, though at the time I had no idea what that meant. I began to grasp the distinctness and fullness of the Catholic tradition during my graduate work at Yale's Divinity School. I attended with no intention to be ordained, I simply wanted to know if what Christians believed could be considered true. Even then, something about Catholicism seemed remote. The Second Vatican Council was underway, which meant we students read Catholic theologians, Ronor, Herring, de Lubac, Conger, on how theology should be done in modernity. But we barely took note of their faith. We also read Martin Luther and John Calvin, but we considered them late medieval thinkers who had more in common with Thomas Aquinas than our Divinity School mentors. In short, the Reformation seemed to us to be back there, and I felt no need to defend Protestantism because it seldom occurred to me that being a Protestant was all that important or interesting. The antagonism of the past simply seemed no longer relevant. It was the 60s, we were attracted to theology as part of a general attempt to make the world better. Protestant Catholic sectarianism didn't feel current. In 1974, I interviewed for my job teaching theology at Notre Dame. Things were going well until a professor on the hiring committee asked what I wanted to teach graduate students. I said I would like to teach a seminar on Aristotle and Aquinas. The response was immediate. Why would you, a Protestant, want to teach a course on a Catholic thinker? Christianity did not begin in the 15th century, I replied. I argued that Aquinas was not a possession of Roman Catholics but a resource for all Christians, whether Protestant or Catholic. It was a small moment, but in that exchange, I began to understand that we were in a new day. 500 years after its inception, we are witnessing the end of the Reformation. The very name Protestant suggests a protest movement aimed at the reform of a church that now bears the name of Roman Catholicism. But the reality is that the Reformation worked. Most of the reforms Protestants wanted Catholics to make have been made. Indulgences are no longer sold, for instance. A few Protestant denominations might still be anti-Catholic. Consider evangelical pastor Robert Jeffress's claim, recently publicized, that Catholicism has satanic origins, but the original idea that Catholics adhere to a legalistic perversion of Christianity that does not admit the free grace of God is seldom seen, these days, as the Protestant difference from Catholicism. Over time, historians have helped us see that there was no one thing the Reformation was about, but that if there was a single characteristic at its heart, it was the recovery of the centrality of Christ for making sense of why Christians are not at home in this world. That emphasis turned out to be the overriding insight that shaped the work of Vatican II, meaning Catholics have overcome the major thrust of the Reformation. That the Reformation has been a success, however, has put Protestantism in a crisis. Winning is dangerous. What do you do next? Do you return to Mother Church? It seems not. Instead, Protestantism has become an end in itself, even though it's hard to explain from a Protestant point of view why it should exist. The result is denominationalism, in which each Protestant church tries to be just different enough from other Protestant churches to attract an increasingly diminishing market share. It's a dismaying circumstance. But I am still a Protestant, even though I am not sure I know what I am saying when I say IA.